Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Clements. I'm the Executive Director of the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy, and I would like to welcome you to the forum today. To help me welcome our guest speaker, Lieutenant Dan Choi, an infantry officer in the United States Army and a prominent LGBT rights activist. On May 1st, 1970, as a fairly young pilot in Vietnam and a graduate of the Air Force Academy, I refused to fly further missions in support of the invasion of Cambodia. So the 40th anniversary of that is taking place the day after tomorrow, so it's a real honor to introduce you today, Dan. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, instituted in 1993 as a compromise between President Clinton and the U.S. military leaders, allowed LGBT Americans to serve in the armed forces as long as their sexual orientation was kept under wrap. Despite President Obama's pledge to allow gay servicemen and women to serve openly, the White House has yet to call for Congress to repeal the law. More than 260 gay and lesbian service members have been discharged since the president's inauguration, causing impatience among gay rights activists and some in the military as well. Overall, almost 13,000 discharges from the U.S. Military have been directly linked to the issue of sexual orientation. And the most famous recent case is Lieutenant Dan Choi. He was born in 1981 and served in the United States Army from 2006 until 2007. He graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 2003 with majors in Arabic and environmental engineering. He then served as an officer in Iraq from 2006 until 2007, when he was transferred to the New York National Guard, serving in the capacity as National Guardsman in Manhattan. After coming out on the Rachel Maddow Show in March of 2009, he was discharged from the Army. Despite a subsequent appeal and a courage campaign petition signed by more than 160,000 people, on June 30th, 2009, a panel of New York National Guard's officers recommended that he be discharged from the military. The final decision to be made by the commander of the 1st Army and the chief of the National Guard Bureau is still pending. In an open letter to President Obama and the United States Congress, Dan called Don't Ask, Don't Tell a slap in the face to me, a slap in the face to my soldiers, peers, and leaders who have demonstrated that an infantry unit can be professional enough to accept diversity, to accept capable leaders, to accept skilled soldiers. Since Dan's coming out, 38 West Point alumni also came out and announced the formation of Knights Out, an organization of West Point alumni who support the rights of LGBT soldiers to serve openly. The West Point teams are called the Black Knights. Choi was one of the founding members and is the spokesperson for a group which promises to help their alma mater educate future Army leaders on the need to accept and honor the sacrifices of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender groups. He has been featured in numerous high-profile publications across the globe for his work as an LGBT activist and has spoken on numerous gay rights events, and today we're delighted to have him here. There have been some very poignant consequences of this policy. I think all of us as soldiers used to know that if we died in the service, we were entitled to a military funeral, which included playing taps. And about a year and a half ago at Arlington National Cemetery, they buried a soldier there, and the musician held a kind of a plastic bugle, and he pushed a button and it played taps. And when a reporter for the Washington Post tried to figure out what was going on, they explained that they had discharged more than 100 gay musicians from the military, and they didn't have enough now to play taps at the soldiers of funerals. Dan Choi is among 59 gay Arabic linguists who have been discharged from the U.S. military from Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and we have an acute shortage of linguists. in the military today, especially Arabic speakers as well. And so I'm sure that he will tell us a lot more about this. And please help me in welcoming Dan Choi.
Hi, Harvard. How are you? Now, I wanted to point out something real quick, because some people had thought the things that have been happening throughout these past weeks, that maybe some of you here, some people that are watching on the live webcast, thought that I would not be here standing in front of you because I would be in jail right now. I mean, some of you thought that when I returned back to my unit just a few months ago that I would never be able to come out and speak again, that perhaps it was a way for the Army to finally shut this kid up, to censor me, to keep me quiet, and that I would never be out speaking about Don't Ask, Don't Tell ever again. Well, to all of those people, I respond, look at me now. I am here. I am standing. I am still speaking out for who I am. I am not afraid. I am not ashamed. I am telling the truth. I'm still a West Point graduate. I am still an officer in the U.S. Army. I am still serving my country. I am still here. I am still standing, and let there be no doubt, I am still gay. Now, about 3 years ago, I wasn't in a place just like this. I was in a place called South Baghdad, the Triangle of Death. In Iraq, we were sitting in a Humvee on a patrol, and what we would normally hear around mid-afternoon would be a call to prayer. And this particular mosque that we were patrolling next to, we thought was a Sunni mosque, so we would hear the Sunni call to prayer. But instead we heard from the megaphone on the minaret, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal faraju ala'an adu ansar waladu maqtada 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 ya Allah ya Muhammad ya Ali ya Mahdi. And we realized that was not the call to prayer. It did not sound like a Sunni call to prayer. What was most surprising about it was it wasn't a call to prayer at all. It wasn't even a Sunni anything. It was a Shia political rally. We weren't so surprised that our intelligence was a little bit off. We were surprised that for centuries in this area and throughout the Middle East, the Shia people were discriminated against, called heretics, worse than unbelievers, infidels, to the point where Shia leaders, ayatollahs and tribal sheikhs would tell their people, their own people, if you're ever in danger for your life, if you're ever going to lose a limb or eyesight, or you're in danger, you might get fired, or maybe you'll lose your career. It's okay for you to hide who you are. You don't have to proclaim that you are Shia. So you would never hear that kind of a proclamation in this area, because this philosophy of hiding, of concealing, we call it in Arabic taqiyya, that you could sort of hide, and God would forgive you. You don't have to worry about it, because we would rather have you live than risk everything, or maybe even to some people, make others uncomfortable. We don't want you to agitate to the point where you might get in trouble. Well, I would go to a lot of these tribal meetings, and I would send a lot of that same message to the tribal leaders that we are not here to do anything but to help you build your government, that it might be fully transparent, that it be representative of all people, that it could be a form of a democracy. You could represent all groups. Not one group could be denied their rights at the expense of their dignity, that they can have access to all of the resources of their government. You don't have to hide anymore. You don't have to be ashamed anymore. You don't have to abide by these philosophies of concealment or deception. But at the same time, I had to hide something. Even when I would teach tribal leaders that we were really there to help them, build what they could be all that they could be. I would recite Arabic poetry, one of the most famous poems written by Mutanabbi. الخيل والليل والبيضاء تعرفني وسيفه ورمحه قرطاسي وقلمه إنها الذي نظر الأعمال الشعري وأسمعت كلماتي من به صمم. The horses and the night and the sand in the desert, they all know me. The sword and the spear, the pen and the scroll, they all know me. I am the one that can make the deaf to hear my poetry. I am the one that can make the blind to read my prose. They know me. It's this poem of identity. You don't have to be hiding anymore. You don't have to be ashamed anymore. And while I would preach that, I still had to hide something deep down inside. It was in the most dangerous area of Iraq. We could have died at any moment. But I was hiding something. I was sharing intimate secrets with the people that were on my left and my right, men and women. But I had to hide something. And that is the real pernicious disaster of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, what it does every single day in the heart of a soldier. It says, you must be ashamed. See, I could come up here and talk all day about all the statistics. We could recite the 13,500 soldiers who have been kicked out since the institution of this policy, 800 mission-critical soldiers who have been booted, 4,000 every year who quit. We talk about 60 Arabic linguists, Farsi linguists who have been kicked out. We could talk about $1.3 billion that has been used from our taxpayer money just to fund the kicking out, just to fund the process of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and replacing some of these soldiers. We'd talk about all of the facts and figures, but in the end, the message is very clear, because this is the only law in the entire federal government that says you must be ashamed of who you are. It is enforced shame, it is enforced lying, it is enforced deception. It doesn't end there. It doesn't end at the individual level, because the partners of those soldiers, of those service members, are also forced not only into shame, but into secrecy and to non-existence. As we're standing here and sitting here tonight in Cambridge, there is a lesbian or a gay partner of a soldier who's deployed right now. As they sit by that phone, they sit by that email, they are worried to death about whether they get that phone call tonight. Because they've been getting that phone call every single day this week or throughout this entire month, the entire deployment. That's how they know that their partner is still alive, that they're going to live another day. What if they don't get that phone call tonight as they sit by that phone, eyes glued to CNN, trying to get some information? What if they don't get that email? They will never know if tonight was the last night that their partner, their loved one, was on this earth. They might get notified by CNN because they want to do an interview, or a local newspaper because they want to do an article about it. It doesn't end at the partner either, because when I talk about 13,500 soldiers who have been kicked out, the gay soldiers are not the greatest victim. When I say 13,500 soldiers have been kicked out, you have to realize that that's 13,500 units that are deploying overseas with one less surgeon, with one less combat medic, with one less infantryman, with one less Arabic linguist, with one less pilot. You are sending units overseas without the full armor, without the full support that they deserve. Now, we could talk about why Don't Ask, Don't Tell is absolutely detrimental in many different ways, but the fact of the matter is, I get all these questions all the time. So, you knew, Lieutenant Choi, you knew that there was Don't Ask, Don't Tell when you joined in 1999 at West Point. Didn't you know the law? And isn't it so accommodating that we didn't ask you? So why did you come out? Nobody forced you to come out. Nobody forced you to tell. And I have to admit that's true. Nobody did ask me. When I answer that question, I think you have to realize something about me. It might be confusing or surprising to you if I tell you that my dad is a Southern Baptist minister. I know a lot of people are a little bit confused because they say, okay, we get this whole gay thing and this whole military thing, but you're Southern Baptist and you're Asian. I don't understand how that all works. Maybe because you're all from South Korea. You think you could just apply that? Well, my dad is a Southern Baptist minister, and I was never going to come out of the closet to him. And I was never going to come out of the closet to my mom, who is a nurse at the maternity ward. She's a baby nurse. Essentially, that means she wants to have a lot of grandbabies. More particularly, she wants to have a lot of Korean grandbabies. So I thought that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was a great thing. I said, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is wonderful. I'm comfortable staying in the closet because I'm never going to come out. It's a way for me to hide. And so when I thought about the reasons why I came out, it's very simple. My mom was just so annoying. She asked me about every 5 minutes one question that's more debilitating than any weapon system. She said, when you marry. When you marry. And she would always say, when you marry Korean girl. When you marry Korean girl. It was what do you want for breakfast? When you marry Korean girl. What do you want for lunch? When you marry Korean girl. What do you want dinner? When you marry Korean girl. When do you want to get your master's? And when you marry Korean girl. So I just came up to her at one point. I said, Mom, I am not going to marry a Korean girl. And she looked at me, her eyes got all big as Asian women's eyes can get, as she said, what you mean you no marry Korean girl? No marry white girl! And I realized that I might need to explain it to her in a couple of different ways. I said, no, I'm gay and I was born this way. I believe me, I've tried to pray all the time. I've tried to pray the gay away. Every revival service, the Bible studies, I would be praying about it. I would pray so hard. And she said, how hard do you pray? And I said, well, one time, because anybody here who understands, who was raised in a Christian tradition, if I could get hands of people who understand. Okay, so for those of you who weren't, essentially it's really simple. It boils down to this. If you want something to happen, if you want God to listen to you, you start, in at least my tradition, you say, Dear God, and you ask your thing, and then you say, in Jesus' name I pray, amen. Right? And then God will have this, his ear just tuned to you and whatever you say. So I said, Mom, you taught me how to pray, and I've been praying this whole time. I said, I want to change. I don't want to be gay, so my prayers will be so passionate. I said, Dear God, please, let me pop a boner for Michelle Pfeiffer. In Jesus' name, in Jesus' most holy and precious name, amen. And she looked at me and she said, how could you pray like this? How could you pray like this? This is so bad. Why you pray Michelle Pfeiffer? And it was so difficult for her to pronounce Pfeiffer. But how you pray for Michelle Pfeiffer? You should pray for Korean girl. Then Jesus answer your prayer. So I'd realized that I had to help her through this a little bit more. Well, before I could even get in any more conversation with her, my dad wakes up and comes into the room, and my mom grabs my hand and says, tell Daddy. And as he sits down, and he says, what are you talking about? Because obviously when you're trying to sleep and you wake up on a Friday morning and people are talking about boners in Jesus' name and Michelle Pfeiffer, something's going on. So he said, what are you talking about? And I said, Dad, I'm gay. He sits right back up and he says, since when? Since when are you gay? And I realized in my living room, at my home, my parents had the yellow and blue signs for Proposition 8, and I knew that it would take a little bit longer for me to explain some of these things about myself to them. I had gone through this truth of myself for 28 years, and they had just gone through it for 28 seconds. So I figured it might take a little bit of time, but it was difficult for me to put myself into my parents' shoes, but when I realized that they weren't necessarily meaning to insult me or hurt me, their view was just based on what they grew up thinking that I would be. If you've ever been to my church, really the purpose of going to church for my mom at some Sundays was just to say that she was better than all the other parents out there. And she would tell every single parent, look at my son. He go to West Point. He get a good grade, like almost all A. He go to Iraq, he infantry, and he come back from Iraq, and he is so strong, and he's a tall Asian. So he's better than your son. And I realized that for my mom, at least, my purpose in life was to be the validation of her existence. And so realizing that, I said, Mom, if you really want me to be the source of your pride and your bragging, I'm okay with that. And if you want me to be that for you, and if that means that I have to marry a Korean girl, then I am amenable to that. I'll consider it. But you have to write on the wedding invitation, and you have to have the preacher announce at the wedding ceremony that this is all one big lie, that this is a fake wedding. My son is gay. You have to write that on the wedding invitation in English, you have to write it in Korean, you have to write it in Spanish, and you have to write it in Arabic. At which point she just looked at me so incredulous and said, "Why do you invite Arabic people to the wedding?" My dad and I had some very difficult conversations as well. For 6 months, I lived with my parents during this coming out process. And it was sort of like a basic training. Coming out to Rachel Maddow was not a big deal after coming out to my parents. But my dad pummeled me every day with these 9 Bible verses, concluding that being gay is the number one sin. He said, this is the number one sin. It's the number one shame. At which point I respond back to him, I've sat through all of your sermons, Dad. I've learned all of the things that you've taught in Bible studies and revivals and at the retreats. Number one sin, in our tradition, the number one sin is not to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And the number one command is to love your neighbor as yourself. And what is inherent in that command? To me, when I take a look at that verse and apply it to my own life, I realize there's a lot of reasons why we might believe that we shouldn't love ourselves, and some churches might even preach that. But in order to fulfill his command, you do have to love yourself. God created you gay. God created you lesbian. God created you bisexual. God created you transgender. God created you genderqueer. You have to love yourself. There is a reason why you are the way you are. Well, when I talked about Jesus Christ and all of the lessons that I wanted to apply in my life, sometimes it wasn't so easy because there's the focus on just these handful of Bible verses. But when I look at the story of Jesus, I realize that he faced this fierce opposition by the religious and political establishment in his day. And his program of civil disobedience included breaking the norms, breaking traditions, breaking regulations, breaking the regulations of the Sabbath, the rules that governed all life. And he was labeled as a traitor, as a radical, as an extremist. He was spat upon, despised, rejected, labeled fringe, a troublemaker, seditious, an agitator. He was betrayed by his own community, and he was betrayed by his own disciples. He was crucified for the heresy of proclaiming what? Nothing more than proclaiming who he was deep down inside, breaking the don't ask, don't tell policy of his day. Well, the legacy of Jesus Christ and the other monumental practitioners of nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience, unfortunately, is sometimes relegated to a speech or a sermon. And I think that we forget everything about their true legacy. These historic figures, we forget everything except for the prophetic writings or maybe just a visual image that we saw in a magazine. And that's how they'll be remembered. And that betrays their life work, it betrays their ministry, and it betrays their legacy. And Dr. Martin Luther King, is absolutely betrayed by those today who would boil down and whittle down his entire life's purpose and his life's work into one soundbite from one speech. Do we remember that at that speech where he proclaimed, "I have a dream" in Washington, that the next day he was not invited with other civil rights leaders to talk to the president at the White House? Do we remember that he went down to Alabama and continued to agitate and to go to jail more than 14 times repeatedly, causing the trouble, breaking those regulations? Do you remember that although Malcolm X's probably more remembered for his criticism of the political systems, it was Martin Luther King who decried the Democratic Party and their use of black people as tokens. Do we remember that in that letter from a Birmingham prison to other clergy members, he said he is not so angry at the Ku Klux Klan. He's angry at the white moderate, that in their silence and in their inaction, they commit the moral turpitude, just as bad as the Ku Klux Klan. Well, his tactics were certainly questioned by those people who lived in his day, by those people in his own community, just as all those practitioners of civil disobedience, criticized by their own, they had to engage in civil disobedience. I believe that civil disobedience has two aims. The first is more visible and more seemingly valuable and relevant in the short term, and that is the political aim, the strategic political aim to specifically influence some kind of legislation or an official shift in policy or in action. That is obvious. And in our actions with this new group that we've started, Get Equal, in the past months, we've organized arrests and disruptions of fundraisers, sit-ins, and rallies, and we've targeted, in particular, congressmen who are able to put forth Employment Non-Discrimination Act in Congress, put it to a vote. And as far as Don't Ask, Don't Tell goes, specifically, we're pressuring the president to do everything that he can to show leadership, finally show leadership, as he has been refusing to show the necessary leadership and resolve to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell and exercise his power to put the language into the defense authorization budget and transmit that to Congress, as that is the only way that you're going to prevent hundreds of soldiers from being fired this year. That is the only way that he's going to make good on his promise. That is the only way that he's going to finish what he so boldly and publicly started. That's the political aims. That's the political and very visible aim of civil disobedience. But the second aim, I believe, is often overlooked by political elites, lobbyists, and policy experts. It's not seen as important in the short term, or it's not seen as so relevant. The aim is less tangible, it's rarely profitable, it's not always visible, but its power is unparalleled in all civil rights movements. They will know its strength, and that aim that we so strive for is the reclaiming of dignity on an individual level and as a community. The reclaiming of dignity, we find there is no greater method of reclaiming than to engage in the civil disobedience, standing against the immoral laws and suffering the consequences and saying, I am willing to get arrested, I am willing to suffer, because the moral turpitude of this law, this unjust law, is something that needs to be agitated against. And there is no stronger message. Well, there are always people, as there are people now, even within the LGBT community, who, for many reasons, perhaps because they have grown comfortable in their own strategies and in their own tactics and their own ways, perhaps because they're financially well established, high-ranking, or they just know how to lobby a lot better than the younger folks. They scoff at the sacrifices of those who are willing to engage in civil disobedience. And they take stock in venerable titles, thinking that that superficial measure of acceptance is going to get them recognition or some kind of an actual dignity. But even being a major contributor to a political campaign or a major donor to a group does not buy you, does not purchase you actual dignity. It does not confer full dignity on an oppressed people. Having grown comfortable in their high status and their material gains, the elites will scoff at all of us who are willing to risk arrest and incarceration, discharge and unemployment. They'll mock the sacrifices of those in their own family, calling them immature, unsophisticated, naive, reactionary. And they pose perhaps an all too familiar question throughout history to those who are willing to engage in civil disobedience. They say, how dare you agitate? How dare you cause a ruckus? We were so close. How dare you create the tension? Do you know what this is making us look like? How dare you be the cause of the tension? And our only purpose and our only response here is to just simply observe the world around us when people accuse us of causing tension. The tension exists. The tension exists when you're not allowed to get married to the person that you love. The tension exists when binational couples can't be united because citizenship opportunities are not available to them, even in immigration reform. The tension exists when you're unemployed because you refuse to lie or you refuse to hide your orientation or your gender identity. The tension exists when gay men are not even allowed to donate blood. The tension exists beyond the legislative arena as well. The tension exists when you cannot even go to prom with the person that you love. The tension exists when children are chased out of their churches and their mosques, their synagogues and their temples, unwelcome in their own schools and kicked out of their own homes. The composite of all of this, all of the tension and discrimination is perhaps best illustrated by the disparities in the treatment of our military families and partners. Is during the most solemn of all ceremonies, the memorial service for a fallen service member. The flag that drapes a coffin is folded and is such ceremonious, solemn gratitude and honor and dignity. A general on bended knee presents to the loved one, grieving the death of their partner, and says, on behalf of a grateful nation, we honor the sacrifices of you and your partner. The message of appreciation, the message of dignity is absolute. But to the gay or lesbian partner, who's not afforded the flag, who's not afforded the ceremony, who's not afforded the right to even exist in that very painful and heart-wrenching time of bereavement, the message is unequivocal. The message is absolutely clear. Our country is not grateful for you. We do not honor your sacrifice. The overwhelming feelings of shame and betrayal, they rise to the surface. And you see that the tension is there. There's a resounding message from the government. It strips off all rank. It strips off all pretense of perceptions of dignity to the point where you no longer have a first name. According to our government, your first name is faggot. Your first name is dyke. And the message resounds. The American promise of equality and dignity, it's a finite and limited resource, and it is not for you. So fuck you, faggot. You don't deserve respect. Fuck you, dyke. There ain't no dignity here for you. There's little wonder why gay and transgender youth are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than their classmates. There's little wonder why 9 times more likely for gay and transgender youth to commit suicide if they're in a homophobic environment. There is little wonder why gay and transgender teens make up more than 50%, greater than half of all of the homeless youth that are on the street tonight. There is little wonder why our movement acknowledges the need now to restore that basic human dignity and acknowledges that most honored aim of civil disobedience. And when you look at some of the recent actions that we've engaged in, you will hear a familiar strain, a familiar chant. It's very simple. Something of a rallying cry now. And I want you all here in this room to understand it with me, the full measure of the dignity that's conferred by this simple strain. Are you ready to repeat after me? I am somebody, and I deserve full equality. Right here, right now, I am somebody, and I deserve full equality. I am somebody, and I deserve full equality. Right here, right now, I am somebody, and I deserve full equality. I am somebody, and I deserve full equality. Right here, right now, I am somebody, and I deserve full equality. We make this declaration boldly. Our words and our actions remind us of that simple truth, that I am somebody. You notice that we didn't say, I am somebody as long as I stay in the closet. We notice that it's not, I am somebody as long as I don't get kicked out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It's not, I am somebody so long as I donate enough money to the DNC and keep the Democrats in power in 2010. It's, I am somebody regardless, right here, right now, I deserve full equality. And just like those Shia who rejected the philosophy of hiding, even at the cost of their own lives, we stand firm on that foundation of our own dignity, because without it, we go into battle without our full armor. And now we can fully understand, and I can fully understand, the wisdom of those Bible verses that I learned at all of those retreats, particularly the wisdom that we find in Ephesians, which teaches us to put on the full armor of God so you can take your stand. With the belt of truth buckled around your waist, you stand. With the breastplate of righteousness in place, to stand. With your feet planted, filled, and fitted with readiness, stand. Take up the shield of faith and stand. Take up the helmet of salvation and stand. Take up the sword of the Spirit and stand, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, you'll remain standing. Well, I stand here today. I am defiant, and I am unashamed, and I am unapologetic in my violation of unjust laws. I stand on the sacrifices of those who have taken a stand before me. I stand on the sacrifices and the shoulders of Leonard Matlovich. I stand on the shoulders of Dr. Martin Luther King. I stand on the sacrifices of Jesus Christ. I stand on the principles of the Constitution ensuring equal justice under the law and the Pledge of Allegiance with liberty and justice for all, and the principles of the West Point Honor Code. I stand on all of the promises of America. I am standing on the promises of America, and I am standing on the promises of God, as we sang so often in our hymnal. I'm standing on the promises that cannot fail. Though the howling winds of fear and doubt assail, by the living word of God I shall prevail. I am standing on the promises of God. I am standing, I am standing, I am standing on the promises of God. And I promise you this, they may try to discriminate against us, but I will stand. So long as we have to fight laws that enforce fear and shame and lying, I will stand. They may try to silence me, but I will stand. They may try to censor me, but I will stand. They might try to tell me to sit down, but I will stand. They may try to arrest me, but I will stand. They may send me to jail, but I will stand, because I am somebody, and I am still standing. Thank you.
So if you haven't been in the forum before, we have a couple of simple guidelines. A question should end with a question mark. You're certainly free to make a few framing statements if you want to before you ask your question, but we ask you to come to either of the microphones to ask your question, and we welcome your presence.
Hi, Lieutenant Choi. First of all, thanks for being here.
It's great to be here.
My name's Alex Palmer. I'm a sophomore at the college. And I just wanted to ask you, do you think going forward with your movement, it's going to be more important to appeal directly to some of the higher officials, like President Obama, hope to appeal directly to him, or to get a well of popular support going so that it's sort of an unignorable movement that Obama has to respond to?
Thank you for a wonderful question. I think it's not necessarily one or the other. You have to do both. And when you look at the necessity of pressuring high-level leaders, we can take a look at history when you see President Truman, through executive order and through his leadership, repealed the segregation in the military. And President Eisenhower, who used the executive authority as commander-in-chief to desegregate Little Rock High School. And President Johnson, who, through pressuring Congress, was really the force behind getting the Civil Rights Act passed. So it's absolutely important that the highest levels of government are on our side, but particularly when you look at the fact that President Obama has promised very clearly that he would repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And he has said it repeatedly, that he would do everything that he can. What we're seeing right now, and what the masses are seeing, the people on the ground, is that this is an absolute betrayal of the promise. It's a betrayal of the LGBT community, and it is a betrayal of our American principles, that we would have this kind of law on our books. So we're going to do everything that we can to continue pressuring the president, because it is the president who can put into the defense authorization budget and defense authorization bill, and that is the only way that you're going to get it past the Senate. And to say that anybody is politically naive, to say, well, you need to be trying to do other things, you can't be pressuring the president. It's not only our right to pressure the president, it is our responsibility.
I'm Dave Tierra, I'm a career student here, also an officer in the Army. I seen you on TV, and my question for you is, knowing how much the Army needed skills from linguists and the investment that the military has made in you, wondering why you decided this time, you know, when the nation needs those skills so much, that you decided to make your announcement.
It's a very interesting question. Thank you very much. For a lot of people, they say that it is your decision to come out, and what's inherent in what you're pointing out is that I somehow didn't realize that I was somehow leaving my soldiers while they might be going to a mission. So the onus is now on me, and it's my fault. And the fact of the matter is, nobody forced me to come out, so it was a decision that I made on my own volition. Why did I come out at the time that I did? Apparently you didn't buy the fact that my mom was that annoying, but it was actually true. But you know, when I got into a relationship for the first time in my life, after I came back from Iraq in late 2007, that was the first relationship I ever had. I understood love for the first time, and I had never had a girlfriend or a boyfriend. But coming back from Iraq and also seeing my brother get married, I realized, how long am I going to wait to get on with my life? How much longer can I continue living in the closet and lying about who I am? When I understood commitment and maturity, mutual respect and growth in the context of love, intimacy, for the very first time in my life, then I realized why Don't Ask, Don't Tell is so absolutely wrong. Because it wasn't just about me being in the closet. I had to force my boyfriend into the closet and into non-existence. So that was in early 2008. And as we continued on in our relationship, you know, I just had to talk about it. And I would tell people in my unit, I would say, because I wanted to stay in the military, I said, I have a wonderful, beautiful, amazing girlfriend. And I would create a pseudonym. His name is Matthew, and I would say Martha is the best girlfriend ever, and she's so wonderful. And everybody would be like, "Well, we want to meet Martha. We really think that she's great, and we want to know." My soldiers would be like, "And we want to know, is she as hot as you say she is?" So they always wanted to meet, and I was creating excuses and reasons as to why I shouldn't, or why they shouldn't meet with my girlfriend. She's just too busy, or she just isn't ready to meet my friends, and they weren't buying it. And they said, no, we're going to go drive down to New York City, because I was stationed up at Fort Drum in upstate New York, and we're going to go and meet Martha, because if she's that important to you, then we want to bring her into our circle too. And at one point, I just didn't know what to say. I couldn't come up with any more lies, and I just said, look, she just hates Army people, okay? Which didn't make any sense to him. Well, if she hates Army people, then why? They got the point, and they were just like, okay, we're going to stop asking. We decided that we're going to continue the relationship, and I said, well, I can't deal with going into active duty all the time, every single day, and having to lie about it. So I thought going in the National Guard was going to be easier, because, hey, then you only have to lie once a month. That's all the better. But then, as I came out to my parents, 1 year after the relationship started, and I finally felt that I was able to come to terms with myself, and it was much better to face the consequences of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I realized that my love relationship and telling the truth made it all worth it. And I continued on after I told my parents. I met other veterans who were gay. This is the first time I'd ever met any gay veteran in my life. And when we got together, and some of them West Point graduates, we started this group of West Point alumni who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. And when we got together and started sharing our love stories, we said, there's no reason why we can be hiding any of this. Because then you realize how absolutely dangerous and how absolutely, I think, suffocating, and the cloud of shame that's always following you. You don't realize that when you're just a single person, loveless, relationshipless, sexless, and that's all you are in the military. And that's what I was for the longest time. And then when I finally understood a love relationship, I understood what people were talking about. I understood what the romance novels, not that I read all the romance novels, but I understood what the people were talking about in poems and in movies. I understood what the love songs were what people were singing about. I understood what Beyonce was singing about. Your love got me going so crazy right now. Got me going so crazy in love. I understood all that. Some people criticize me when I say that, because I should really say that I understood what Lady Gaga was singing about, because she's more like gay friendly. But the truth is, I don't really know what Lady Gaga is singing about. I sort of need an interpreter. But I presume it's about love. And so for me, I understood finally that being in a love relationship was something that I could do too. And it made me a better person. It made me a better soldier, because I knew that there was somebody who supported me. It made me a better officer, because then for the first time I understood why I had to go to all those family readiness group meetings with all of the wives and their coffee, and understood why it was so important. I understood why my soldiers would go through a difficult time if they're going through a divorce or if they're going through a breakup. And that stuff I just never really understood on a personal level, because I was following the rules of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so for the first time I realized, what is it all worth? And is it really lying? And then I realized this whole time I've been doing this to myself. So I'm grateful to have made that decision. I think even considering that we are in a time of war, being a better officer right now, because I understand some of my soldiers' concerns and the support that they need, it was not a mistake at all. And the fact of the matter is, I am still serving in the military. And the public nature of my case and my continuing to speak out, for 10 months now, the military hasn't found out what to do with me. The fact of the matter is, they realize the embarrassing nature of somebody who just refuses to lie.
Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and for your talk. My name is Jasmine. I'm a student over at the Divinity School and doing work around the ethics of LGBT organizing. And I appreciated the work you share, or the stories you shared about Get Equal's work. And it seems like in these new campaigns, Get Equal's doing a lot of work around the agitation side of direct action. I wonder if you could talk about how the organization is conceiving of and expressing the other piece of nonviolent resistance, which is the attitude that we strike towards those, or that we take towards those who condemn queer people, and the idea of how to uphold the love ethic even in the midst of that acrimonious relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that very important, insightful question. I think that when we contest the moral indignation, when we contest the unjust law, we are showing love to those people who might not understand us right now. Love comes in many different ways, and there are many different forms of love. As divinity scholars would point out, Martin Luther King points out sometimes the three forms of love: the brotherly love, the eros love, and unconditional love. I think that when you talk about expressing love in an unconditional format, is not necessarily a love of affection. It doesn't always take that same form of a love, certainly of intimacy. And when you talk about how do we express our love as a group that is such an agitating force, that sometimes makes it difficult for people to be comfortable around us, and agitates to the point where some people might not want to ruffle our feathers. It's hard to see that we are expressing a kind of intimate love or a kind of affection love. But an unconditional love is one that's based on rectifying the immorality, because that, in the end, allows for all of us to live in a more harmonious society. Now, we don't go and share the same kind of hatred or display the same kind of bigotry to those people who are so adamantly opposed to us. So in that way, we do express a little bit of at least openness to brotherly love and affection. I respond to a lot of hate mail every single day. I realize that it's not somebody who hates me, or that hates gay people, but it's just that they're misinformed and that they are sometimes uninformed. So it's our job to do everything that we can in our rabble-rousing, in our agitation. That is a form of love.
I'm sorry that I've missed these upper mics, so go ahead at this mic.
Thank you very much for being here. My name is Alexander. I'm a freshman at the college. And I was just curious, within your unit, what would you say was the general sentiment towards homosexuality? And then after you came out, what was the reaction?
Well, I never really was interested in gauging and polling the sentiments of homosexuality in my unit. But when I came out, and some people would posit that after maybe 50 or so CNN and MSNBC and national TV interviews and maybe 100 radio interviews and coupled with the Army Times, that I'm quite possibly the most flaming homosexual in the entire U.S. Armed Forces. Some people might contest that, but I think that I found, by my going back to my unit, such an amazingly poignant and simple retort to the ideas that the presence of openly gay people in the military would be negatively impactful on unit cohesion and morale and those things. When I went back to my unit, it seemed that everybody just wanted to come back and talk to me. Obviously, some of the leaders in my unit wrote letters of recommendation for me for my trial back in June. So I was finally able to thank them. When I went back to my unit and we did marksmanship training, some of the most amazing things happened. People would just come up to me and just be like, "Sir, my brother is gay." They'd be like, "Great." Yeah. "Sir, my cousin's gay." One person, when I was on the firing range, just tapped me on the shoulder and was just like, "Sir, I want to let you know, my mom is a hairdresser." And number one, I was confused because I didn't understand like the hairdresser thing. So I was just, and he was like, "No, that means she likes gay people because tons of hairdressers are gay. Your people, they're gay hairdressers." And I said, "Thank you so much for teaching me about my own community." And then number two, I was confused because like, why are you interrupting me while I'm on the firing line? But it was so important to them to be able to finally say these things, because for the longest time, if you think somebody's gay in the unit, you have to tiptoe around that because you think that you're not able to even discuss it because then you'd be outing them. So for the first time, I'd realized that being honest, and seeing absolutely positive evidence of the fact that if you're honest in any organization, not just the military, but particularly in my particular unit, when you're honest about who you are, when you're not afraid to discuss your own identity, when you can have those kinds of conversations, unit cohesion, morale, teamwork increases. And all of the capabilities of any organization always increase.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Choi. My name is Ned. I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School. I appreciate very much your comments today and in the past about the implications of don't ask, don't tell. My question has to do more with your understanding of the notion of civil disobedience. And in particular, I'm wondering whether you would advocate that all gay and lesbian members of the military follow the course that you've chosen. And if so, what would the implications of that be for both the readiness and preparations of our armed forces? And if not, why have you chosen this course?
Very insightful question. I appreciate that. I do believe that every single gay, lesbian, and bisexual member in the U.S. Armed Forces should commit civil disobedience against don't ask, don't tell. I believe that is a moral mandate. Because when you look at the idea of civil disobedience, and when you go through the history of not only people in our country, but people who have worn the uniform in other countries and been in professions that perhaps mandate against that kind of perhaps disruptive behavior, you could look at Socrates and the very fact that when you look at what he said in the Credo and the Apology, I particularly read the Cliff Notes version. So I got the basic gist that he was telling truth to power. But that was a big no-no at the time for his profession, which really did demand so much of the members of that profession to follow along with certain kinds of regulations. You could go as far as American Revolution, when people used different kinds of tactics, and they were called ungentlemanly. And they were told that their kind of behavior, using these tactics, is so disruptive and so absolutely heinous that how could you dare do this? But now when we look back at history, we realize that it is so amazing that that was even called some kind of disobedience, some kind of direct action, some kind of disruptive behavior. And I think 60 years from now, or even 100 years from now, we'll look back on this day and we'll say, I can't believe that it was considered civil disobedience just to say 3 words. It is considered disobedient to say, I am gay. I just did it again. I committed civil disobedience in 2010 by saying, as a currently serving Army officer, I am gay. So yes, I do encourage people to do that, not only because it's an important moral mandate, but because it does confer that dignity upon you in ways that many other things cannot. Rank can't do it, a pension can't do it, an increased salary can't do it. And those people, not only in the military, but others in the entire LGBT community in particular, they think that they can gain rank, or they can gain dignity, or they can confer that kind of acceptance or acknowledgement or recognition upon themselves by getting a promotion in their work, or doing something so wonderful for a particular political party, or being a major donor to a certain organization, have their name on a plaque, on a wall, on a brick. That does not confer dignity. The only way that you can do it is to stand up in a way, and sometimes it does require agitation. I know that I answered your question in a little bit of a general sense, and you're particularly talking about my use of the uniform in getting arrested at the gates of the White House. For me, it was a difficult decision. It was not easy because I knew the sentiments of wearing that uniform and the fears that people would would have when they saw that. The implications, not only in civil disobedience for gaining equality and repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Some people have pointed out, well, what if people use that kind of tactic for other methods? Would you be okay with that? And I think it's absolutely heinous to think that all of the political agendas that people have in mind are equal to the very essence of Don't Ask, Don't Tell's heinous nature, which enforces lying. I think it's absolutely unfair and inappropriate comparison. Don't Ask, Don't Tell is the absolute most immoral law, and it requires us to stand up using all means necessary. For me, wearing that uniform, certainly. There are some people who would say it goes against their sentiments and their ideas of tradition and symbolism. For some people, I've gotten messages say that it irked them to a point that they just didn't know how the gay community would look in the eyes of those people who were supposedly on the fence. And they were just so ready to support the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. If you hadn't done that, now you did that and you screwed up the whole thing. Yeah, so there's a lot of people who always use that argument. But for me, when I think about the uniform, I realize that on the very first day that we wear the uniform, that we put on the uniform and we raise our right hand, we do it not for symbolism and not for traditions and not for sentiments. We do it because we protect the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And as I wore that uniform in a foreign capacity, I have no problem using it in a domestic capacity against the very enemy of our Constitution, which is discrimination, which is inequality. And for the moment, for me, right now, is Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
I applaud your courage as well, like all of my fellows here. And my name is Paul Duffy. I'm from Boston. My question is a follow-up to the gentleman here. There are a number of men and women who don't have the type of courage that you do and are not able to come out, who are actively serving. Presumably you know some and many of them. A different type of courage will probably be needed in strategy as Don't Ask, Don't Tell is finally repealed. And I wonder how you counsel and work with those still actively, still closeted members of the service.
Thank you so much for that absolutely insightful question, because when you talk about what it requires to even come up with strategy, a lot of people feel that they have the courage to do that. And when you talk about the courage that's required and the proposition that I have a certain kind of courage that other people don't, I contest that. I think every single person has the kind of courage that is required to tell the truth. And for a lot of us, when we are put into certain situations, that courage comes to the surface. I think for a lot of people, they have to realize why certain people make those decisions. Some people say courage is nothing more than a mere lack of options. When your back is against the wall, you will be courageous. When you have no other choice, you will be courageous. And as far as strategy goes, I think we must realize the human nature that forces us to take action, mostly at times when we have no other option but to be courageous. So when we develop our strategy and we develop our actions, we have to realize that we must agitate to the point that people are uncomfortable and they feel that they cannot do anything else. When we can achieve that, and when we can agitate to the point where we tell particularly those people who purport to be on our side that you must make this decision, we are forcing you to be courageous, that's when we can start to succeed. But until then, all we're going to do is, and now I'm talking about particular political parties and particular political agendas and particular political leaders who might put their agenda and their own jobs at a higher priority than equality and the dignity of gay and lesbian people, LGBT people. I think that they haven't had the pressure. They haven't ever had their back against the wall. They've never seen that gay people in America will stand up to them. And until we can do that, our only strategy is to accommodate to one particular party. Until we can actually force that particular political party or those political leaders to take action, we're only going to get the incremental, accommodating token positions within that movement and pretend that they're on our side. The fact of the matter is, they are not on our side. They pretend to because they have a political agenda. And until we can raise ourselves up to agitate, we're going to be stuck in the same gear.
You've been very patient at this mic here. I think this will have to be our last question, but I'm sure that Dan will be available afterwards to speak to people individually. So go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for your moving speech. My name is Amanda. I'm a first year at the college, and I'm also an intern at the Carr Center. In your speech, you mentioned several times, or you implied that indifference is a crime. My question to you is that for those who do not identify themselves as LGBT, what is their role in the movement? In essence, what do we have to do to not be indifferent?
I think it's an absolutely critical question when you ask, what is the role? Since I'm essentially saying that the greatest enemy is not necessarily those who are homophobic, but it's those who aren't willing to step up. I think when you objectively and more tangibly take a look at what is possible for any kind of ally, it's the same advice that I give to any kind of gay or transgender youth that asks the same thing, what can we do? And I am not going to stand up here and tell you that there's one particular route that you can contribute. Obviously, if you're in a position of power, it is your responsibility to push legislation. It is obviously your responsibility to create awareness, increase awareness with the platform that you have. The fact of the matter is, every single person has a certain talent and a certain skill set. And for me to say that everybody needs to lobby their congressman, I realize that even though this is Harvard University, there are some people here who are just really bad at lobbying their congressman. And they might be good at other things. Yeah, they might be good at music. They might be good at art. They might be good at Facebook or Twitter. So it's not for me to tell you exactly the route, how to be an ally or how to be an activist or how to stand up. Everybody knows what they're good at. And I think one of the larger problems of our movement is that we create this idea that there's only one way that you can get involved. The fact of the matter is, when you look at the National Equality March that happened in October, it was the first march that was solely created on a national level, marching on Washington, that didn't use professional media consultants and national advertising, didn't have an extravagant budget under $100,000, and majority of that was just to pay for the porta potties. We used Twitter, we used Facebook, we had Equality Idol, people sang songs and they made music videos. And if I were to say the only way that you can affect change, the only way that you can be an ally is for you to call your congressman, and for you to do it this way, I think is shortchanging not only the individual that you talk to, but the movement overall. And one thing that we learned from all of this is that we have nothing to lose, young people who are just starting out and asking, what can we do? You have nothing to lose. How much does it cost to start a Facebook group that says straight people for gay rights? How much does it cost to tweet some things about your views? How much does it cost to stand up in your fraternity and say, this is my lesbian friend, this is my gay friend? How much does it cost? You have nothing to lose. And for anybody to say that you need to do it in a certain way and it costs a certain amount of money, I think is not only selling the movement short, but it's selling themselves short to think that there's only one way of doing things. So I hope we can all find out what we are all good at. Proof is, 2 years ago, as an Army officer, just got back from Iraq, I don't think anybody, if they looked at my resume, would say, this guy is going to be a gay activist. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Dan on behalf of the Institute of Politics and the Forum, and I also want to mention that although you've been a little bit disdainful of this year's study period that the DoD has engaged in, they have reached out to the Carr Center for Human Rights, and we're assisting in a small way with that. And there are some very complex pieces to this, and let me just give you a couple of examples that we've been discussing. I'm Unitarian Universalist. We ordain lesbian and gay ministers in our faith. And the military is worried that its chaplains need to be able to be pastors to everyone. And what if you have a Southern Baptist, and there are many, one say conservative Christian pastors in the military, doesn't want to be pastor to a gay or lesbian. They may have to resign from the military if they can't actually provide pastoral services to a gay or lesbian soldier. So the military is trying to look at all of those kinds of issues. In every country where the U.S. military is, we have a status of forces agreement. And the status of forces agreement looks at local laws versus American laws and how those will be adjudicated. And so it may be against the law to be gay in Iraq. I don't know, but if you're off base with your boyfriend or girlfriend in the military and are gay or lesbian and display some affection, in some countries you could very well be arrested and put in jail. And how does the U.S. military protect its men and women in uniform from local laws that are contrary to the laws that are made on the base? And do you have to kind of be one way on the base and then suddenly go into hiding as you go off the base? So the DoD is engaged in this. I think it's a very serious exploration of many, many complex issues that when the law is changed, that will ripple down throughout the military. They're trying to understand these, trying to anticipate them, I think. And I have no doubt it will happen. It may not happen as rapidly as you would like it to happen, but I think it will happen. I want to thank you for your leadership. I haven't saluted anyone in 40 years since I refused to fly 40 years ago, but I want to salute you, Dan, and thank you for what you've done.